tonight's meeting, and just to review that with you very quickly here, and you should have a copy of that, and it's listed up here on the screen. We'll give you a very quick background and try to cover about 12 years or so in rapid fashion. For those of you who may be new to the process, it's important to understand some of the background materials that have brought us to this point in time, and we'll take you right through that and on to where we are today. And Barbara French, who's our Vice Chancellor for University Relations, will give you the status of the management project and why we're here tonight, and especially what she hopes to hear from you about in the course of this evening's meeting. We do have Kent Julin, who's a arborist and a consultant to the university, and we'll talk about the proposed hazard reduction measures and give you a set of slides there that will help you understand what those proposals are all about. And Kevin Bouchamp, who's the Director of Physical Planning here at the university, will discuss with you the draft environmental impact report, the status of that, and the process for how the university will be moving forward with that. We do have an extensive feedback and Q&A period planned, and because we have such a good turnout, we do want to make sure everyone has an equal chance to participate in that and to make their comments known. We have set of speaker cards here. We'd ask that you fill those in so we can go through those one by one and make sure everyone does get a chance to make their comments. I've got a number of these already turned in, and we'll just keep coming around the aisles to collect those so we can have an orderly and methodical approach to that. And that'll be at the end of all the presentations. We promise to keep those fairly brief and to the point, so we can get more quickly to your comments and questions. To the extent we can answer questions, we will try and do so. If we don't know the answer to those, we'll be writing them down along with your comments to make sure we get everything on record, and so we can follow up with you later. And all of this information eventually will be on the website for the university, so you'll be able to get access to the presentation as well as any handwritten materials that are produced, and any comments that come out from tonight's meeting will be summarized and put up on the website as well. We also have handed out a comment card, and so as we go through the different topics of the meeting, we really appreciate you filling this out so we have individual comments from each of you about the different topics here that are likely to come up in tonight's discussion. We'd love to have each of you turn these in if you so desire, and there's room to write additional comments on the back, so please take advantage of that as you hear the different speakers and the community members commenting on this. We'd like to get your thoughts and reactions to the various ideas or concepts that are put forward here by the university, as well as from your fellow residents here in the city of San Francisco. There's also a map of the proposed hazard reduction measures. We'll be going over that in some detail, and so please refer to that at the various points along the way. Just to recap a few things that are important to note in our recent history about Mount Sutro and the management of the Open Space Reserve. There was a plan put forward back in 2001, which was developed with a substantial amount of community involvement. Many of you were in attendance at some of those meetings, and you see one of the diagrams on the slide screen representing that plan, which was to look at the future of the Open Space Reserve and try to maintain and manage it for health and species diversity. Somewhat after that, in 2009, 2010, additional work was done to look at the management of the forest, and as was recommended in that Open Space Reserve plan from 2001, a series of demonstration projects were developed and proposed for the Mount Sutro Reserve. And a number of community meetings were held at which members of the community interested in this subject came and gave feedback about these proposed demonstration projects. We had 2 walking tours with many of you out on the site with our arborists and fire ecologists. We have since then, that time, November 2010, produced a summary of those meetings and discussions. All of that material is also available to you. You can access that on the university website. And in January 2010, there was an environmental impact report, a scoping meeting that was connected with those demonstration projects, because obviously any action would require analysis under the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, which I'm sure you're well aware. And in February 2013, there was a public hearing for this draft environmental impact report. And that essentially brings us up to today's meeting. And what I'd like to do now is turn this over to Barbara French, who is the Vice Chancellor for University Relations. She'll talk about what the university is hoping to achieve at this point in time, given that past history and all the community feedback that we've had to date, which has been extensive and which I know will continue as a result of tonight's meeting. So, Barbara French, please take it away.
Thank you, Daniel. Hello, everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces and some faces that are new, so welcome to both our old friends and our new friends. And I really want to thank you for turning out tonight to help us discuss further and advance the stewardship of this important resource in San Francisco. So, as many of you may know, the 61-acre Mount Sutro Open Space Reserve is the property of the UC Regents, and UCSF is tasked with caring for that asset. As Daniel said, back in February of this year, after a lot of history, we put out a draft environmental impact report and sought the community's input on a program to manage the forest. And that program had multiple objectives. We got a lot of comment and feedback on that plan, and based on that, our planners and the rest of our university looked at the comments. And what we did is kind of regrouped, and the comments and feedback we received caused us to regroup and really sit down and say, at the end of the day, what is our top top responsibility in terms of stewarding this resource? And with leadership, we decided, and with leadership, the Chancellor has a leadership council, of which I'm a part of, and with leadership, we said there's 2 primary things that UCSF is responsible for. One primary is the safety, as this said, the safety of our faculty, staff, students, neighbors, patients, and visitors. And that means life safety as well as safety of the structures. And for those of you who know the forest and the reserve, you know that we have some residential housing there. We have some buildings. It sits adjacent to our tertiary and quaternary care hospital. Currently, our children's hospital is housed there, as well as our professional students attend classes and such adjacent to it as well. And we also know that there's obviously a lot of homes in the near vicinity, some across the street from and some very close to. So in the end, we decided very firmly that our responsibility, and it says here, we're really committed to having a safe environment for our faculty, staff, students, neighbors, patients, and visitors. So with that, and after looking at all the comments, in the comments, I would say there was a diversity of opinion. There were people who supported our forest management efforts, but were concerned about the use of herbicides in any of the demonstration areas. And as you may know, for those of you who are familiar with it, we have proposed different demonstration areas primarily to say what's the right approach for the management of the forest. And one of the things we have proposed is using herbicides as a way to test regrowth. If you go out and do try to take down some blackberry or poison oak, what's the best way to prevent that from coming? Or if you cut down a hazardous tree, what's the best way to prevent regrowth? So we were saying we were going to look into that, and at the end of those demonstration periods, really decide what's the best way to proceed with the 61 acres. So some were very supportive of it, as I said, but were concerned about the herbicides. Many were concerned about possibility in terms of the maximum number of trees that could be cut to achieve some of the objectives in that plan. Others preferred that nothing at all be done, that the forest be left as it is. And one thing came through loud and clear. Many, many, many people love the trails and wanted us to continue to maintain and take care of those trails. So why we're here tonight is, after considering all the comments, sharing those with leadership, and determining that this was really our top objective, we asked Kent Julian, who you'll be hearing from in a little bit, to come and advise us and say, if this is our highest and best purpose, how do we do that in a responsible way? Again, reflecting the comments we received back in the draft environmental impact report. So Ken, working with us and working with our leadership, Ken will outline, and he'll go over tonight, something we're calling the hazard reduction alternative. And so what we're proposing is that we add an alternative to the draft environmental impact report, that we recirculate that next year for your comments. And the purpose then of tonight is to share that draft alternative, to inform you of the process that will follow going forward, and to answer your questions about that. I do want to underscore that there has been a tremendous amount of thought that's gone into this. There's been a tremendous amount of efforts to seek the highest and best counsel. We are, after all, a health sciences university. We do not have a Department of Forestry. So this is not our core competency, but we have sought extensive advice. We've relied on our staff, whose job it is to maintain the forest in our facilities. So this does, I think, truly represent a lot of good hard work on behalf of our staff and our consultants. So the one other thing I want to go over is, since February, in August and September, we did implement urgent fire safety measures. And this again came out of our clear determination that our highest purpose is the safety of lives, protection of lives and protection of structures. So with that, and given particularly that this was, if not the driest year on record in California, certainly stands to be, and given that there were other fires happening, we undertook urgent fire safety measures to reduce the fuel load within the fire around structures. And again, with the counsel of Kent Julian, and we also consulted the San Francisco Fire Department, we basically created 100 feet of fuel clearance around the structures in the forest and adjacent to the nearby households. These measures were exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act because they were urgent fire safety measures due to the hazardous conditions in the forest. So they were exempt from CEQA, and we did undertake them, and that was the purpose of that. That work, the bulk of that work has been done. There's a little bit cleanup that has to be done around some fire hydrants, a little bit more around a couple of other areas that I think either Kevin or Damon or Kent can address. But for all intents and purposes, that work is completed. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for your time, your energy, your thoughts. And I do want to let you know that when you do speak to us, we do listen, and we are thoughtful about it. So with that, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Would now like to have Kent Julian come forward and give you an overview of this proposed hazard reduction plan. Ken, if you could use that microphone, you'll be off and running, and then here's the clicker, and take it away, please. Thank you very much. And I do have a bunch of speaker cards. If you'd like to turn those in to me, I'll walk around, and this way we can make sure we get everybody into the conversation after our brief presentations here. Ken?
Thank you. It's so nice to see so many people. It shows great interest in the forest. I recognize it as an important resource for the university and the community, and it's in the heart of San Francisco. And I'm really happy to be here tonight to talk to you about my perspective of the forest and what I see when I walk through it. I'm going to back up once. Where's the map? Okay. This is a map of the urgent fire safety measures that were implemented in August. And the university invited me over across the bay. I live in Woodacre, which is near San Rafael. And I've spent my life as a forester and as a battalion chief for the Marin County Fire Department. So I bring with me those experiences of seeing forest management, the really good side of it. I've seen the bad side of forest management. I have seen tremendous fires burning through the landscape, consuming houses, frightening people, and it's given me a perspective that I brought with me. So I've seen it on bad days, and I've seen it on good days. And when Barbara invited me to come to look at the forest, I was immediately struck by the lack of clearance around structures and near roadways. These are really important areas to treat. When there's a wildfire, firefighters have to access the fire area, and if the roads are choked with vegetation, it's very difficult. The radiant heat alone from a roadside fire will keep you from driving down that road. So at a minimum, I felt that clearance was necessary. And we have in purple at the very bottom along Crestmont and Christopher, an area along near houses that was cleared along the roadside. Along the north end, right here near the hospital, this area was cleared along the roadside. And then next to the Vision Center, right here, that area was cleared. So this provides firefighters with an opportunity to at least address the fire in the forest. In the interior of the reserve, there are areas that are important for fighting fires. And one of those areas is a water source. Now, there are 3 water tanks within the reserve that I felt needed clearance around them in order to allow firefighters to back their trucks up to get water to their pumpers. So we cleared the vegetation around this water tank and then these 2 water tanks here. So there's a halo around those water tanks, and I want to emphasize that it wasn't cutting every tree. What we did was we thinned the forest, we thinned the shrubbery around it to allow this space, this work here. It's just a very practical way of protecting that fire resource. The other areas that I suggested that we treat were around the Aldea housing complex, which is in the lower right-hand area. I have it done in yellowish. And then around Surge and Woods. I'm not sure they're visible up here. Anyway, there are 2 buildings right in the center right here that we did clearance around. So I'm going to show you some examples of what we did. Again, we provided 100 feet of defensible space clearance around near structures and water tanks. We targeted those trees that were 6 inches or less in diameter. We thinned the shrubs, and we mowed the grasses and weeds. The work areas include the housing complex, Surrey Woods, water tanks, Christopher Crestmont, Johnstone Drive, and Corette Way, which is the Division Center. I estimate that, and I was there every day that the men were working, I estimate that fewer than 1,000 trees were removed over this 12-acre area. So here's an example. This is near the Surge building. This is a research building where they study infectious diseases, and I think it's really important that we protect this from a wildfire. You can see the area before on the upper left-hand side where we have acacia trees and shrubbery actually touching the wood shingle siding, and the area after we did the treatment. So it's a thin forest. At this point, it looks pretty barren in the understory. I can assure you that the poison oak and blackberries will resprout and grow. And within a year, it will be very attractive. This is the second area that we treated around the Aldea housing complex. And for those of you that maybe haven't stepped off the paths and walked through this forest, it's a thick understory of Cape ivy, English ivy, blackberry. I have the wounds to prove it, having walked through this. And this vegetation is being supported. It's like a blanket of vegetation that's been thrown across the sticks and leaves and branches from the eucalyptus forest. And so when we went in and we mowed this area, of course we brought it all down to the ground. And firefighters really appreciate it when the fuel is near the ground. It's much easier to fight a fire that's near the ground. It's in a low intensity fire. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. And again, all the perennial plants will rebound after this. Here's an example of Crestmont Drive, where we did some clearing along the roadside. And this, to me, was really important because it allows, and even Chief Hayes White, the chief of the San Francisco Fire Department, was astonished by how close the vegetation was to the edge of the road. And she was opining that probably the fire trucks would have a difficult time making it down that road if there was a fire. So she really, we brought her back to this site afterwards and really appreciated it. So not only is the fire danger reduced, I think the safety for residents along the edge where they park is much improved because there aren't hiding places in the woods there. So I just want to take a moment to let you know how I view the forest. And I've done reading about it, and I've walked through the forest, and I have my own impression about it. And I know that it was planted in the late 1800s as a plantation. And the three primary trees that were planted were Tasmanian blue gum, Monterey cypress, and Monterey pine. There were also plum trees that were planted. So we have this area, this 61 acres of plantation, right? And this forest now is composed of different groups or cohorts of different generations of trees. We have the legacy, the remnants of the older trees. They're probably about 100 years old. Then we have trees that have sprouted from the root crowns or the stumps that were created when during the Depression years that this area was cut for fuel wood. I've seen pictures of enormous piles of cordwood that were generated from this forest. And then the third cohort or group are volunteers. Those are the plants, trees that came in after, say, the fire in 1899 or the fire in 1934. In order to regenerate a eucalyptus forest, you need disturbance. And these fires cleared the understory and allowed these seeds that are about the size of a period at the end of a sentence. They're very tiny. In order for those seeds to be successful in germinating and growing, they need a fairly disturbed site. So either a bare mineral soil created by a hoe or a fire. clears the ground. So the third cohort are these volunteers that have come in. Now, in walking through the forest and doing an recent inventory of the forest, I saw very little regeneration, very few eucalyptus seedlings. I'm not surprised by that because of the lack of research. So, and another part that I can share with you is there is variation in the forest with regard to site quality. And foresters are really interested in growing the trees on the best sites because they produce the fastest, tallest, biggest trees. And so I just want you to know that there are areas that are very fertile, and point to them. This would represent an area that's highly fertile, and the trees in that area are enormous. And the distance between trees is great. So there might be 40 feet or 50 feet between individual trees. And that's a product of maybe they were planted far apart from one another. It may be a product of them going in and thinning that area historically, and the stumps are gone. It's most likely a product that it's a very good site, very good growing site. And under those conditions, things happen quickly. Competition plays out very quickly. There are other areas on the forest, for example, the south right here, and this area in the west right here, and I'll show you pictures of those, where the stand density is very great. You might have a tree every 8 feet or 10 feet. And that's either those trees may be younger because of past cutting practices, but also the site quality is poor. The ability for the trees to grow and to clobber their neighbor. And it's like 200 men standing next to each other, wanting to fight each other, and they don't really have the energy to do it. And that's what happens on a poor quality site, is the trees are not equipped, they don't grow very quickly to outcompete one another. Thank you for indulging me in that explanation. So when I walk through the forest, I can see that it could use a little bit of management in order to bring it into what I would consider a safe condition, a condition that would allow firefighters time to slow the fire down and to stop it before it causes severe damage. And I identified 3 areas, 3 broad areas, and then a roadway. So let's just start with Medical Center Way. I think that road needs a good roadside clearance. I think that in order to use it as a fire break, if there's a fire, or to allow firefighters to go through the forest or meet a fire, I think that that's absolutely necessary. And this roadside clearance will also improve safety for driving. The area in the south along these these dense neighborhoods is fairly crowded with trees. I think that there's an opportunity to thin the forest and to reduce the amount of fuel in this area. So, and then in the north, next to Medical Center Way in the hospital, these trees are fairly large, and I think an understory treatment and a thinning out of the smaller trees is warranted. And then the most dense stand of the entire forest is up in this area. And I have a picture of that as well. So, the proposed, my advice to the university is to reduce fire hazard in your developed areas. I calculate there are about 25 areas in these 4 locations where almost 4,000 trees would be removed. And reserve, of course, totals 61 acres. Right. So this is the area in the south that I showed you, the 17 acres. And if you look at this forest, you see it's fairly dense. What I'm suggesting is that we thin trees that are less than 6 inches in diameter. Remove all vines on the tree trunks. It's primarily English ivy to keep, if a fire were to get into the forest, to keep the fire down into the ground. And then to thin the shrubs and perennial plants that would be mow them by mowing. The materials that are generated by this work would be chipped and left on site, be spread around. So that would be my proposal for this area. This is the 4-acre western site up near the Vision Center. Is it the Vision Center? I get the hearing and the site mixed up, and this is impenetrable. When I did the plots to characterize the forest out there, it was very difficult even just walking through this. And what you don't see are the accumulated sticks and boughs and all of the dead material that's accumulated on the forest floor. It's being supported in the mid-story shrubbery, and it's leaning up against the trees. There's a lot of fuel, and this fuel becomes available enough during the year that I think it presents a problem. The third area is the north, which is a 4-acre area that's closest to the hospital. And the area, I don't know if you're familiar with it, there's the Surge Woods walkway that goes down to the hospital, and it's the area between that and the hairpin turn. And I think with a little bit of management that this area can be made much more safe for the hospital. All right. I'm also proposing clearance along Medical Center Way. There are probably thousands of vehicle trips that go up and down this road. I know that the shuttle goes at least 500 times up and down the road, especially when you're trying to work. These are ignition sources. These are opportunities for a fire to start. And if we can treat the roadside vegetation so that if a fire does start there from a cigarette, from a clinker, a piece of metal that comes out of the exhaust pipe, firefighters will have an opportunity to address it before it really grows and gets large. So I'm proposing a 25-foot roadside clearance along Medical Center Way from Johnstone all the way down to near Workers. So this work, I estimate that it'll take about a month to complete. I'm recommending mechanical treatment for regrowth control. And here's another one of my stories. When you go into a forest, you need to recognize that the canopies of the tops of the trees are intertwined, but also the roots are intertwined. And many of the roots form unions between each other, and they're called root grafts. And I learned the hard way that if you cut a tree and you apply herbicide to that stump, that herbicide can translocate in the root system to the neighboring tree and kill it. So I'm recommending that we not use herbicides for that primary reason, to preserve the trees that are being left behind. Instead, we can use a mechanical physical barrier, which would be plastic. We can make it brown or camo or whatever color it would, that would be attractive. It would cover the stump. It would prevent it from resprouting. Then also shrubs would be treated in a similar way, cut with hand tools. I don't think we would be covering them with tarping. Again, we're not planning to use herbicide to control the growth. So before we go to the next speaker, my experience with the forest is in a condition that can be improved. And I think it can be done safely. I think it can be done environmentally sensitively. And I think in the long run, it's a good way for the university and the neighbors to reduce risk. Now, I carry insurance, and I paid my life insurance yesterday. And I recognize that I don't think it's likely that I'm going to die, but I want to be prepared for my family. And so I think that these fire prevention measures is like an insurance policy, that in the event that the unthinkable happens, we have an opportunity to address it, to stop it. And with that, I'll hand the mic back.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Ken. I'd like to now have Kevin Bouchamp give a very short presentation on the environmental impact report process, the status of that, and then we're going to get right into the comment period. And I've got a number of speaker cards here. Again, if you'd like to turn them in as I go around the aisles here, we'll get everybody up to the microphone up front, and we have other mobile mics that we can bring around too. So, Kevin, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to just spend a few moments saying a few words about the environmental impact review process that I'm sure many of you are already aware of. As most of you know, in February, we published the draft EIR, and there was a public comment period. We received comments on that. What we are proposing to do now is to modify the project description in the draft EIR and republish the draft EIR chapters that have changed, describing the environmental impacts of the modified project that you just heard about. The revised chapters will be circulated for public comment for a period of 45 days, and during that time we will hold another public comment period during which oral comments on the draft EIR will be received. And of course, folks are also welcome to submit written comments during that time as well. We currently expect that the revised chapters of the draft EIR will be circulated in February of next year, and that the additional public comment period and hearing will happen in the March timeframe. After that, we will prepare written comments not only to the written responses, not only to the comments that we received on the original draft EIR, but also the revised draft EIR, and be responding to those in writing and publishing those, after which the final EIR will be certified in the May and June timeframe of 2014. And once that occurs, then the project can be brought forward for approval after the final EIR is certified. So just a brief overview of where what our next steps are with the draft EIR. So, turn it back to Dan.
Very good. Thank you very much, Kevin. And that brings us to our comment period, and we're going to go in an orderly fashion here. If you don't mind, we're going to get right into the questions, comments. We'll try our best to answer questions if we have the answers. If not, we're writing everything down, and we'll get back to you with those answers as best as we can and as quickly as we can. So this is a work in progress and an ongoing process. So as Kevin said, there's still many steps ahead with respect to the completion of the environmental document, and we're going to need to get through that in order to complete the process. So the first speaker I have is Gerard Livernoir. Again, I apologize if I mispronounce your name, and I apologize in advance. If you can come up and pick up the microphone here, we'd appreciate that. And let me just turn that on. And again, we are making a record of your basic comments. We are recording the proceedings as well, so we can go back and capture all of the detail. But just again, as a reminder, if you could fill in your individual comment cards, we really appreciate that as well, because it gives us a sense of how all of you individually and as a group feel about the various issues here and the various proposals for managing for us. So, Gerard, please proceed. Thank you very much. And we're not setting any time limits here, but we just ask that you try to be respectful of all the people who want to speak, so we get everybody into the conversation. So, go ahead.
I commented back in February's meeting. I had an art studio, which I no longer have, at 18th and Street in the Mission, where I observe the fog coming over Twin Peaks as it rolls over the Barron Twin Peaks. And on the north of Sutro Tower, where it hits the forest. Where it hits the forest, the fog hits.
Okay. Yes, sort of eat the mic and it'll.
I observed the fog hitting the forest from the studio in the Mission area. And this is one of my many photos here. And as you can see, the forest does a great job of stopping the fog coming over into the Castro. And thousands of those photos. My concern in the original draft report was the lack of information about the wind changing and the Castro and other neighborhoods to the east experience less fog than Noe Valley from my observations. And so that's that subject. And since then, I've done a lot of reading about Ishii. And there's a couple of books I brought along. As you know, Ishii spent some time his last 4 years here at UCSF. There's nothing here to commemorate him, but he does mention in this book by Theodore Kroger, he does mention time in Sutro Forest and his enjoyment of the eucalyptus trees in particular. As well, there's a few mentions of it in this other book that came out recently by Douglas Sackman called Wild Men. So there's some history of the forest with probably, in my opinion, one of the greatest figures we've ever beaten in San Francisco. So those are my two subjects. Thank you.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Gerard. So I'm going to try to call the names ahead of time. Maybe someone could turn that down so that we're getting some feedback. Paul Rodder and Neff Rodder and Craig Dawson were the next speakers. So if you could come up to the microphone, we'd appreciate it. And again, if you don't mind coming right close to the mic, that'll make sure everyone gets picked up.
I'm Paul Rodder. I live at the intersection of Belgrade and Steen, so we're neighbors on the eastern side of the forest. In 1999,
Why don't you speak to the audience instead of the screen? Let's speak this way. Let's speak this way instead of the screen.
in 1999, the university published one of the early Mount Sutro open space reserve maintenance and restoration plans. In this thing, they studied 6 different alternate management plans.
Into the mic.
And one of the projects was called Restoration with Native Shrub and Tree Species. It called for a change of a reserve from forest to open scrub grassland, creates expansive views, and built on regional programs aimed at preserving and restoring native plants. I think that probably pretty well describes the proposal to this date. Would you not say so? That program of these 6 had an estimated cost of $13 million. Now, at every meeting we've had, and I've been going to every one of them, we have asked the university, what is this going to cost? And are we talking about $15 million? You know? I mean, if we got to this stage in the plan for this project, and there are no dollar figures, I think that's extremely negligent. So, using your own figures here of $13 million in the first year, the subsequent years, or in something like the subsequent years, that plan would be $119,000 every year to maintain the forest. The university yesterday experienced a strike, and the university will probably be telling its workers that there is no money for wages, benefits, care facilities, and things like that. What are you going to tell them? That there's no money for that thing, but we do have money, or we will get money to cut down the forest. So, where's the money?
Right. So, I don't know if Barbara, you want to address this. Paul, the document you're referring to has a date on it of what?
1999.
1999. Okay, so that's a bit old there. Let's see what the latest plan is, and Barbara, maybe you can address that.
So I said that plan that you addressed and the plan that was circulated earlier this year had multiple objectives. You read a segment of the plan from the 1999, and which included one of the objectives, and the back then, and even I think part of the flavor of earlier this year was really looking at a management of the forest. And I said, after we received the comments and after we regrouped as a team and talked to our leadership, was really, we have focused our objective now on the safety and on safety. So our objective with the plan that our arborist outlined is to protect life and to protect structure. And the hazard reduction alternative that he addressed is, as he said, is 25 acres versus 61 acres. And it's targeted at actions that can be taken to mitigate fire danger, to protect life and protect structures, to give, as he said, to give firefighters a chance to get through those streets and in if there were a fire, and to take quick measures in the event of a fire to protect life and structure. So that's our sole focus. In terms of the cost, once as this proposal is further developed, we anticipate it'll be sharply less expensive than the figure you quoted, and those figures will be available once we finalize the plan.
Thank you. Let's have the next speaker. Is that, yeah? Thank you.
My understanding now is that the 4 demonstration areas that were proposed previously have given over to this new plan that's just for fire safety.
That's correct.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Well, just know that we value eucalyptus trees, whether they're native or not, and they aren't native. But we want to see as many of those trees remain as possible.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Craig Dawson is next up. After that, we'll have Dee Salburn and Anastasia Lukatkin. Sorry if I mispronounced, but go ahead, Craig.
So I'm Craig Dawson, and many of you have heard me speak in the past. I am the executive director of the Sutro Stewards. I am also one of the authors of the early 2001 management plan for Mount Sutro, which did call for a number of different objectives, including demonstration areas. And I've been a part of this process. It goes back over 13 years now. Very little has actually changed in Mount Sutro in that time, other than the fact that we have opened the area up so that many of you can get out of your homes and recreate up there. We have established a series of trails that will take you through that forest. We have replanted the summit where the Nike radar station was once occupying the land. And in general, many of you wouldn't be here tonight if it weren't for the work of many volunteers and over, I think it's 40,000 hours we have sacrificed up on that hill to make it a place that you can adventure in. Tonight's presentation is not what I expected. It is, in fact, a change of course, but it is a change of course that I feel is necessary for the very same reasons that I once encouraged the university to be proactive in the management of their open space so that we would have a safe open space, safe for people who these days, like yourselves, get up there and visit, safe to the homeowners in the communities that surround the mountain, primarily from the danger of fire, which you heard spoken about considerably this evening. I had some observations I was going to share with you. In fact, you can read about the observations. In fact, the tour that I've been taking dozens of people on the last 6 months on Sutro. They're on our website, sutrostewards.org. But I don't have to relate that to you because Kent actually related a very similar experience that he had in walking through the forest and stopping to observe, not just to enjoy the greenness and the fog and the mist dripping off the trees and that sort of thing that we really do appreciate but to actually stand there and take a moment to see what makes it green, a lot of what you see is actually not a healthy condition. It is a symptom of decline of this forest that we treasure so much. And when you see the beautiful green ivy climbing up 100 feet into the tops of the eucalyptus, that is evidence of the decline. When you see the forest covered in a blanket of blackberry from one side to the other, that is evidence of a decline as well. And to change the course of, and to change the health, and to ensure that a generation or 2 or 3 from now, we have a forest to recreate in, I feel that the actions that Kent proposed in terms of first beginning to manage some areas to minimize the fire danger is prudent. I would hope that those areas are managed after the initial thinning so that we don't have instantaneous regrowth, which would, again, provide for not just safety, but an opportunity for some of the dormant seeds that lie in the ground to sprout. And within 4 or 5 years, we may have an understory that is something a little more diverse than the blackberry that currently carpets the floor. So I'm ad-libbing. I heard something tonight that I didn't expect, but I agree with the purpose, and I urge you to consider supporting that as well. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. See Dee Selgren as the next speaker. If you could come up, Dee, and then Anastasia after that.
Hi, good evening. Can everybody hear me? Okay. I'd like to address an issue that hasn't been talked a lot about tonight, but it underlies many of the things that are decisions that have been made and are ongoing. And that concerns the whole issue of invasive species and how it also relates to how San Francisco is perceived as a unique place, a very diverse place. And I'd like to share with you just a few paragraphs from something that you might not have seen that was published in the New York Times on September the 7th of this year. The title was, "Hey, You Calling Me an Invasive Species?" It was written by an individual named Verlyn Klinkenborg, who was on the editorial staff of the New York Times. It begins, and I'll just share a few of the paragraphs. It's not a long piece if you look it up on the web, but obviously I don't want to take time tonight to read the whole thing. Since the 1880s, there have been blue gum eucalyptus trees growing on San Francisco's Mount Sutro, which lies just south of Golden Gate Park. Recently, the University of California, San Francisco, which owns most of Mount Sutro, has been trying to thin the dense eucalyptus forest. The reason is fire control. Eucalyptus trees are, quote, fire intensive, unquote, shedding a lot of debris and burning with unusual volatility. But the effort to cull the Mount Sutro forest has been met with strident protests by residents who want to see the eucalyptus left untouched. By the standard of the California Native Plant Society, eucalyptus, which were brought from Australia, are officially non-native trees because they were introduced after the first European contact with the New World. But the trees on Mount Sutro have been there within the memory of every living San Franciscan. And to the generations who have grown up within view of them, it seems almost perverse to insist that they are aliens. To keep a clear distinction between native and non-native species requires nearly geologic memory. But humans, like most species, don't live in the past, where the distinction originates. In the present, the difference is largely immaterial. Native or non-native, California's eucalyptus trees, like the starlings of Central Park, have come to seem original just because they predate us. And then a few paragraphs down, he continues, it's important to remember that the distinction between native and non-native depends on an imaginary snapshot of this continent taken just before European contact. That distinction is becoming even harder to make as climate change alters the natural world. In the last paragraph, he addresses this in a larger context that I think is very relevant to San Francisco. He has spoken in preceding paragraphs about Central Park, and he ends the little essay with, nature in Central Park can't be neatly divided into native or non-native species, and neither can it be on Mount Sutro. The eucalyptus trees that grow there may be naturalized rather than native, but try telling that to all the other creatures that live in these woods or the people who live there. And when it comes to the distinction between native and non-native, we always leave one species out. Call us what you will, native, naturalized, alien, or invasive.
Okay, thank you very much. Anastasia, and after that we have Nancy Haley and Craig Morrison.
I wanted to ask a question before I start speaking. And the question is, this plan, I mean, relatively nice. It's not really nice. It can be cut substantially. And I have a question about this plan as well, new option. But does it really mean that the insane options offered before are now scrapped? Or is it just to calm up the neighbor so they don't talk anymore and keep quiet? And, meanwhile everything proceeds and those awful 7.5 acres with intensive pesticide use will be one of the options still in the book.
Okay, let me see if Barbara could address that, or Kevin maybe is the best. Yes, go ahead.
So in response to your question, yes, we are not proceeding with the original plan, and the reason I think we can assure you of that is when we do our revised draft environmental impact report, we will be changing the project description from the old plan to the new plan. So if we wanted to revert back to the old plan, we would have to do a whole new EIR on that at some later point in time.
So there will be no for demonstration project, there will be no cutting of 90% of the trees.
That's correct. What you heard here, the hazard reduction plan, is what we will be doing in our EIR and moving forward for approval of.
Another question, I was hearing right now about hazard reduction, okay? And it was saying that hazardous trees need to be removed, which is, of course, hazardous trees need to be removed, particularly if they're near the trails. But then there is a plan to put the plastic on to prevent the regrowth. Does it, is it genetics that if the tree is hazardous at this moment, whatever regrows is going to be hazardous as well? Like why?
Okay. Kent, maybe you could address the issue of the methods that are being used to prevent regrowth and how that would be implemented.
So your question is, which stumps get covered?
No, my question is, you're saying we're cutting hazardous trees and then covering the stumps of those hazardous trees to prevent regrowth. Like, why do we need to prevent regrowth? The new trees, are they going to be hazardous by default?
Okay, let me address your question. There are two ways that trees can be hazardous. Okay, I'll address the falling hazard first. So those trees that are within falling distance of a trail, or a road, or a structure, those are structurally hazardous trees. The arrangement of the forest right now is so dense that because of the spatial arrangement of the trees next to one another and the vertical arrangement of foliage, that's a hazardous condition. So we want to move away from that. I'm recommending moving away from it. So what we're proposing is removing intermediate trees that are relatively small, and covering those stumps with plastic to prevent them from regrowing, and allowing their neighbors to occupy the space and to grow into that new growing space that we've created. So the hazard is removed by changing the structure of the forest, its arrangement.
Go ahead.
And like this emergency hazard reduction, which was done recently, like I couldn't believe it for 1 second, because the water was dripping up in my neighborhood from the skies. Like, you know, I'm in a little bit better neighborhood. I have to Mount Davidson. It's slightly drier on Mount Sutro, but like, why 100 feet need to be cut around? I would say, like, if you make the minimum or maximum 30, like 100 feet is a lot of space, and if you start cutting 100 feet around everything, what is going to be left? Okay, my time is up.
No.
I wanted to say in the beginning when I came here that University of San Francisco is a great university. I mean, the doctors are great, the research is great, and they're teaching students very well, but somehow they're engaged in all these strange projects, like the recent new logo, which was reversed, and longer time ago there was a module with Stanford, which cost a lot of money, but was reversed still. But like when the trees are cut and the forest destroyed, you can't reverse it. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Okay, Nancy McKaylee, Craig Morton are the next speakers.
I'm Nancy McNally. Okay. I wanted to address my feelings about native plants, which is not so different from the native.
Closer to the microphone.
It's not different from the article in the New York Times. I'm a native San Franciscan. I've been gardening for over 60 years. And this summer in this neighborhood was the wettest summer I ever remembered. It was what I call rain fog. Every day, the whole summer. So when this emergency occurred, I simply didn't believe it. Why should I? Anyway, I have a real problem with the native plant movement because it sounds so wonderful, organic, native. People like that name. They don't even think about it. It just sounds good. But the fact is, like the article in the New York Times said, what is native? Especially here in San Francisco, it's all sand dune. And I see the programs of native plantings in the parks, and they look like hell. It just looks awful. And the plants die. So that's all I have to say is I think it's a total failure, and it's like making everybody eat fruit because they're a fruitarian, therefore the whole world should be a fruitarian. It's just a fad.
Very good. Craig Morton, and then after that we have Rory Walensky and Sheffield Hyde.
Okay, no problem. Anastasia asked most of the
Close to the mic.
Okay, Anastasia asked most of the questions that I was interested in. Follow up on that. So what you're saying is you're abandoning the old plan, which proposed to cut like 60,000 trees, and or like 90% of the eucalyptus trees, and that's now being abandoned.
So once again, we'll just have Kevin repeat his answer from before.
Yes, because if we wanted to revert back to the old plan, we would have to do an entirely new EIR at some future point.
Okay, so you're talking about removing the total, the whole project was only like 3,800 trees.
Yes. It's
Okay.
everything that was described.
Okay.
Tonight.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Rory is the next speaker. Again, close to the mic, eat the mic. Here we go.
My name is Rory Walensky, and I live on Devonshire, which is very close to Westmore, and we're right next to the forest. My opinion, this forest should get a landmark status. And when you're talking about the landmark status of a building, and somebody wants to do something with it, the criteria is that they have to work with the landmark status. So any changes has to work in such a way that later on it's not going to be different. And I think that basically the the whole proposal is very aggressive. And I think whatever you're going to do with the forest, under this plan or under the old plan, it's going to look different. It's going to be different. So when people say, what about our children, what about the future generation, when you're going to go and basically go with an aggressive approach to cut trees, it's going to be different. And it doesn't take into consideration the uniqueness of this forest, which doesn't exist anywhere in the city. The fact that it's a very wet, foggy forest. So I think that there's something to consider when they did this emergency fire cutting and removal of trees around Christopher and Crestmont. I was following them. And that, to me, there's no, I mean, when somebody calls this an emergency, this is not an emergency. This is basically a trick. If somebody comes and says, okay, I found somewhere that I can use this exemption to CEQA and get it through without any discussion. The forest has been there for years. There was no reason not to come up with this particular 100-foot proposal 1 year, 2 years, 5 years ago. There was no reason not to have discussion. And basically just somebody came within 2-3 days. There was no way for the neighbor to come and protest, present an opinion. It was an emergency. And also, I don't think that the fire department of San Francisco came to UCSF and requested this 100 feet. I think basically what happened is that somebody from UCSF went to the fire department and said, please help us. We would like to do something. We found a trick here, and come help us, and basically let's do it. And that's the way it was. So I don't think that this was a fair approach. I don't think it's an ethical approach, and I don't think it just shows something that basically the landmark status, the uniqueness of the forest is not in the mind of anybody to keep for future generations, and we're sorry about it.
Samuel Hyde is next speaker, Sheffield. And then we have Jack Gashai and Michael Candelaria after that. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, and thank you for your hard work. I want to support the management of the forest. I think from my background, which is fairly unique in both environment and health, this is the correct thing to do for the safety of our citizens, for the health of our citizens, and for the environment. Managing a forest for a unique, diverse understory, especially within a higher education institution, not only enriches the learning of the community around the forest, but the community that is in this university. Having spent a lot of time within the sustainability movement within higher education, I think it's a really big opportunity to seize, to manage the forest, to cultivate that uniqueness. And I think my generation and generations after will look back favorably if that is done. And I think they will wonder why nothing was done if the forest continues to be left as it is. So I support the management of the forest. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Jack is next up, and then we have Michael Candelaria. Go ahead, please.
My name is Jack. I lived in the city for 12 years. I am now a mile away from you, Kent. I'm over in San Geronimo, surrounded by living green trees that could combust and kill me at any time. I gave myself away, didn't I? So I'm going to try to do something tough in this room. I'm going to make a statement that everybody can agree with. Let's see if I can do this. This forest has kind of gone wild. Planted over 100 years ago by Sutro. It's now got a huge understory, big eucalyptus trees, falling trees, all the rest of it. Young trees, old trees. And now UCSF would like to manage it, to promote safety, so trees don't fall on people, and so that it doesn't catch fire. Anybody disagree with what I just said? Okay, now I'm going to say stuff a lot of people can disagree with. I advocate keeping a rare, precious jewel of a wild forest in San Francisco. The only one I know of. When I moved here from New York, I moved near Golden Gate Park because I needed open space, and it's fantastic. All man-made, well, mostly non-native anyway, except for some grasses. So that this thing has gone wild and become this incredible wildlife habitat. Oh my God. And when I look at the pictures, I mean, the thing that's so tragic for me is you're intelligent, educated people. Anybody in this room who's for managing a forest and cutting back the acacia and the understory, I mean, you're genuine. What can I say, man? I mean, more power to you. But I just so completely disagree. And I want to be the voice for having wild places in our neighborhoods for our children to walk through trails where you can't see the city. When I saw the pictures of just that little, I wish I could call them up there, but there was, it doesn't matter, it's okay. There's understory and then there was wood chips. I just got a question, like, maybe, because I don't have a forest degree, right? So what do I know? But I see wet, lush understory, blackberry, whatever, and it's in a freaking fog belt, and it's wet in there. The ground is wet, and now the ground is dry, and there's wood chips there. Are the wood chips less flammable now? Is that safer? Okay, I mean, I actually had that question, and also, obviously, I'm an emotional guy. I have an emotional response. When I go in that forest, it's spectacular. There are so many little animals that can live in there, and when we manage it and make it safe, they're not going to have habitat anymore. They're going to go somewhere else. I mean, such that there is to go in the city. And this is San Francisco, for heaven's sake. It's a rare, precious jewel. We know better. I also think, and I've done a lot of reading on a lot of the websites, from our side, which is the Forest Alliance and say Sutro Forest, and I just don't buy the fire hazard bit. I just don't believe it. It's a completely different situation from eucalyptus in Berkeley. It's a whole other argument. Every time I go in the forest, and I've been going in there a lot, it's really wet. And the fact, the gentleman just before me spoke so beautifully about loss of trust. I mean, the people at the university are wonderful people, but when you pull an emergency stunt all of a sudden after going through all this wonderful outreach to the community like tonight, thank you for this, by the way, and then say, immediate fire hazard, we have to cut it, and it's done in a matter of weeks. Like, was it going to explode into flames in the next week or two? I mean, like, what the? Even just as a stunt to get people's trust, it was so wrong. And now I don't have trust. I also don't have trust you won't see this garble on when you go and send workers in there. Instead of cleaning up the understory by hand and raking it out, you're going to spend more money to cut the stuff down with chainsaws. Thousands of trees in an era of man-made global warming. Like, what the? I don't get it. I mean, it's so ridiculous. That's the thing that's so tragic for me. It's beautiful people. Everyone in this room, has a heart and cares, and every one of us loves the forest in one way. But you're going to cut down the forest to save it. I keep coming back to that line. So there are lovely trails through there so people can enjoy it. So obviously I'm not in favor of completely wild forest. It's a matter of degree. And if a tree falls across the trail, chainsaw the tree and move that away so that the trails are open. And if they're big old eucalyptus trees leaning over houses, well, of course, trim those limbs so it doesn't crack and fall and smash a house. But as far as the whole forest being a fire hazard, I mean, really then logically, the only logical conclusion is to cut down all the trees, pave it, and then there's no fire danger. It's called a city. And there's an argument to be made for that, but that's not mine. Mine is we need this precious wild place. And I just don't believe it's a fire hazard, and I could go on to 20 more points, but I don't want to, believe it or not, take over this. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's see, Michael is next up, and then Ron Proctor, and Rupa Rose after that.
Good evening. I just had some questions, basically about, it was mentioned that the use of pesticides were not going to be used. Is that confirmed? Okay.
Yes.
The other thing was displacement of animals. Is the thinning going to displace many animals? And also, are we going to spare some of the eucalyptus?
Okay, so just to touch on those two items, the effect on wildlife and how many trees are remaining. I mean, I think you said 3,700 was the estimated out of an X number of trees.
So the first question has to do about wildlife habitat. Yes, it's going to change, and it'll be more open, and it will regrow in areas. And one of the ironic parts of this is that by thinning the forest, by changing the spacing between Daniel and I from if he's a tree and I'm a tree to too crowded to something like this, it's not a dramatic change in terms of wildlife habitat, but it's an important change in terms of fire control. And the irony for me is by making this change, by thinning the forest, you're actually protecting the forest from burning to the ground and releasing tons and tons of carbon into the air. So there's the irony. We think that we're harming the forest by this proposal. I think it's actually benefiting the forest itself, regardless of people.
So go ahead.
So there's the other question about how much percentage of the eucalyptus will be removed?
Okay, Kent?
I don't have the exact number in my head. In that north area, very few trees would be removed. I think it's on the order of 300 trees. It's a very small amount. In the southern area, where there's 17 acres, somewhere around 2,000 trees would be removed. So what percentage is that? Probably 20% or 10% is a relatively minor part. And these trees are not the dominant tall trees. They're the sub-story trees, the shorter trees.
My next question was, in your impact report that you're going to release, is the total cost of the whole plan going to be elaborated on at that point?
Okay. Kevin?
We don't typically include costs, but if that is of interest, and it sounds like it really is, we'll make that information available somehow, if not in the EIR, then in some other way.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, is it Ron as the next speaker? And then we have Rupa Rose after that. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. I live in the area for about 35 years. I love the Sutro Forest. I love what I see here. It's a beautiful cloud forest. I love it for the habitat value. It reduces air pollution. It harbors, it sequesters tons of carbon, but if it's dead, it's going to release the carbon into the atmosphere. Deforestation accounts for approximately 15% of global CO2 emissions. Fewer trees means more carbon dioxide entering the atmosphere, and global warming is going to increase. Why would a world-renowned health science university contribute to this worldwide disaster of global warming? Ms. French, you don't need to answer that, but according to the American Enterprise Institute, 70% of Americans recognize that climate change is real. What is UCSF's position on global warming? I'd like to hear that. Look at the increase in the severity of natural disasters. As you warm the climate, you basically increase the speed of hurricanes. Fire danger? What fire danger? We're hearing this over and over about the threat, the fear of fire. Sutro Forest is a relatively young forest. Blue gum eucalyptus can live from 200 to 500 years. It's a dense forest. There's less wind. It's more shade. There's less flammable vegetation, except when you cut it down and clear the underbrush. It's moist. All these factors contribute to reduce any fire hazard. We know that it's a fog and shroud forest. It's far more fire resistant than the surrounding city housing because they get soaked by our famous fog in the summer. Huge quantities of water condense out and drip on the ground, and it feeds a lush, fire-resistant understory vegetation. Now, we saw a few moments ago, actually at the beginning of the presentation, the history that was presented, but there was some history that was missed. UCSF tried a couple of years ago, they tried to end around. In 2009, they approached FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and asked for funds. They claimed that there was an alleged fire danger. I don't know if anybody's remembered that. But they were denied by FEMA. The assessors of FEMA said no. Mount Sutro poses a low fire risk. Mr. Julian might appreciate CAL FIRE. CAL FIRE, maybe with respect to him, CAL FIRE also has made a comment or two in their map of San Francisco. In that map, they say there's no areas of very high fire hazard. And this is covering Mount Sutro Forest. Clearly, in CAL FIRE's assessment, there's no high fire hazard. Finally, the emergency work, I believe you had stated that had to be done, was a fabrication. I think you used the San Francisco Fire Department by providing a letter to them. You wrote the letter, they wrote it back to you, and then you justified to do this emergency work that we saw was presented here recently in the presentation. So you did that so you wouldn't be subjected to the California Environmental Quality Act. You'd also wanted to separate from the plan, from the draft EIR. So you're doing this in the guise of an emergency. And I didn't see that as an emergency. When you saw those pictures, you're clearing a little bit along the road, big deal. It's not going to cause a fire danger. That was my assessment of that. So in conclusion, why is UCSF going after clearing this property? Are you doing any future development? Are you going to put in housing? You don't need to answer that, but I'm just posing that. Is there any proposed condos going to be put in here? That's what I'm thinking. Why would UCSF want to destroy an ecosystem on Mount Sutro? Surely the university has sense to be. They're the steward of the forest. You had stated you wanted to manage and care for the forest. So why cut it down? Why cut into it? It's beautiful the way it is. I love the forest, and I strongly oppose this devastating plan to cut down any trees. Maintain them again, don't cut out the understory. The trails are fine, you're doing great at managing the trails. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rupa? Sorry, go ahead.
I think I'd like a couple of things I think need to be clarified. One is in the alternative plan, we're discussing 25 acres. We're not discussing, and the plan does not address 61 acres of the forest. It addresses 25 acres that we have identified have the highest density of trees and the highest density of underbrush and could and therefore pose the most hazard in terms of fueling a fast-moving wildfire. So the hazard alternative plan solely focuses on, as I said, protecting life and structures, both in terms of people walking through the forest on the trails. We don't want somebody to get hit by a falling tree, A, and then B, to mitigate the fire. The other thing in terms of the fire danger and the assessment of the fire danger, very briefly, I asked Kent if he could address that since he's our counsel on both the urgent fire safety actions and on this plan. So I want Kent very briefly to give you his view from both an arborist and a fire chief, a former fire chief battalion, on the fire danger.
Well, I want to address one other thing, if I could, the carbon issue. I think in terms of the short term, there is, I know that there are, that 98% of the carbon in that forest is tied up in the trees that will remain. So we're going to maybe lose 1 to 2% if we remove these smaller trees. That's a reasonable compromise to losing the entire forest to a forest fire. I think it's a real danger. The forest has a legacy of fires. There have been two major fires in the Sutro Forest. There are conditions when the fog is not dripping off the leaves for a week at a time, where those smaller fuels, the 1 hour, the 10-hour fuels, are dry enough to fuel a fast-moving, very difficult to control fire. So I'm certain of it. I've seen it over in Tam Valley, which is very similar to the Sutro Forest. We had a Mother's Day eucalyptus fire, and it moved very quickly, and it's in a foggy area, but it wasn't foggy for those days preceding it. So all we need are October winds and dry conditions, and it will fuel the fire.
Thank you, Ken and Barbara. So Rupa is the next speaker, and we could go over this.
Right. I'd like to start by thanking UCSF for taking the comments seriously. And I must say that this revised plan is a great improvement over the original one. We're talking about 3,700 trees instead of 30,000 trees. So that's straight away a great improvement. I'd also like to thank you for putting it into the DEIR process and giving everybody a chance to comment all over again, and presumably you're going to be evaluating this new alternative in as much depth, or actually hopefully more depth than you did the previous ones. Having said that, I still have a couple of concerns. Number one, with respect, Kent, I think I understand where you're coming from on fire danger, but I think somebody really has to be on the spot over a long period of time to see how this forest operates. And I have a real concern. For instance, the south side, which is close to where I live, and probably the area of the forest that I visit most often around the year, and have been visiting now for a number of years, dry years, wet years, dry seasons, wet seasons. It's one of the wettest areas in the forest. And the reason it's one of the wettest areas in the forest is exactly because it is so dense. It works like a cloud forest. The fog is precipitated by the trees, but it's trapped by the understory. If you thin the understory, it dries out a lot faster. It's very visible. In some areas, you've got a place that hasn't been cleared next to a place that has been cleared. And in one step, you move from mud to dust. So I would urge that you really look into this in much more depth before you start doing anything that's irreversible. The second concern I have is one that was raised earlier by somebody about the habitat. I've seen this happen even with the minimal thinning that has been going on, that there is a distinct difference between a thinned habitat and one where the understory has been allowed to flourish. There are much fewer birds. You can hear the difference. You can hear the volume of the difference. You walk into an area, for instance, the area where the fire emergency work has been done near, I guess it's at Christopher and Forest Knolls, near the pump station. That used to be one of the loudest bird areas, and now not, because there isn't any understory. My third issue is really that it's an ecosystem. And unless you think of it as an ecosystem and respect it as an ecosystem, a lot of the measures that you're going to take will destroy that ecosystem with the best will in the world. I'm not accusing anybody of trying to do anything to deliberately destroy this forest. I think that UCSF is trying its best, and especially now, after hearing this alternative proposal, which makes a lot more sense. I think you are trying very hard to save what you have there. But I also think that it's an ecosystem that needs to be respected as an ecosystem. And so when you're evaluating this new alternative, I would like to see a much better section about the animal life, the bird life. I think that was probably the single weakest section in the existing draft DIR. There was no camera tracking to see what animals were there. There were 2 visits in the daytime and a lot of speculation about what animals and what wildlife might exist there, but no evidence of any kind, no attempt to really study it. So I would like, even for this alternative, I would like a much greater depth in studying the wildlife aspect of it and looking at it as an ecosystem and trying to find ways in which you can really leave as much of the ecosystem untouched as possible. Thank you.
here. I hope you can stay to the end so we can hear everybody. Paul Lovinger and Harold Hugossian are next, and Ariane Emmy.
Well, many people have said a lot of what I wanted to say. I and a friend were in the Sutro Forest on Labor Day, and the labor was intense. 2 men, a supervisor, and a worker from Sonoma Marine Arborists were chipping away with heavy equipment near the tank at the summit. They said the cutting down of trees had gone on for a week. They were supposedly cutting down only those trees that were less than 6 inches. I measured the stump of one of the newly felled trees close to the street. It was 9 inches in diameter. The project was supposedly an emergency to prevent fire. I've been coming to the cloud forest since 1977. I never heard of a fire there, but the arborist here mentioned a couple of fires. How many fires have there been since 1977?
None.
Because there's none that's
He said not aware of any. None. He said not aware.
So that ought to dispose of the issue of emergency. What might be interpreted as a fire hazard was the accumulation of dead trees and twigs and vines and leaves and chips that the men left on the ground. I understand they failed to have the required permits to cut down many of those trees. And Rupa has mentioned about the effect of cutting down on the clouds, on the moisture. And as the gentleman said, it's a very wet place. You can hardly walk without stepping in mud, which is okay. There's a lot of pleasures to that forest. The mud is insignificant. It's a more than century-old forest planted by our own character, Adolf Sutro, former mayor. So a wild forest in the midst of a metropolis is a rare and valuable resource. To subject it to arborcide would be criminal. I urge that you save its life. I made a couple of, by the way, made a couple of subsequent trips to the forest. I first explored the forest with a fellow member of the Sierra Club. We scouted the very first hike that the Sierra Club had in that area, and I've been coming here from time to time, and most recently a week ago. That, by the way, that debris that I spoke of was still there, and I think fire danger is a red herring, but what is going to be done, I don't know. I have some evil thoughts. The question of development came into my evil mind. I mean, is there going to be more university buildings, a housing development, a shopping center, an airport? I don't know. Finally, the lady who read the New York Times piece on the eucalyptus trees, I've been arguing with my friends in the Sierra Club for some time. I think that native versus non-native, I don't quite buy it. I call that botanical chauvinism. We're all immigrants or descendants of immigrants, and we don't discriminate in when it comes to human beings. And why do we discriminate when it comes to plants and flowers and trees? And anyhow, please let's save this forest. Thank you.
Next, then we have Ariane and Herbert Dunmeyer after that.
My name is Harold Hagasian, and I hesitate to use the word native, but I was born in San Francisco. So, I have been coming to various citizens advisory groups and such with the university for about 20 years. I was involved in the community advisory group for the expansion campus, which frankly I was surprised that the university had enough stewardship to decide to have an expansion campus, because as a state entity it doesn't have to abide by city planning laws, and it could have built right up through the whole forest and done the expansion here. But we went through the process and we came up with Mission Bay, which was a great coup, I think. I then was part of the original group that went through the Sutro management plan. And I have to say, we have not had complete ferreting out of the facts, because one of the demonstration areas has been established at the summit of Mount Sutro, at the old Nike missile site. There is a native plant demonstration area called San Francisco Rotary Meadow. I was part of the process in that because I was president of the Rotary Club of San Francisco, and Rotarians donated $100,000 for the acquisition of native plant stock, and put the sweat labor into planting. And fortunately for the university, for the Rotary Club, and for San Francisco and Sutro Forest, up sprang a group called the Mount Sutro Stewards, which has, as Craig told you earlier, put in, and I think it's probably more than 40,000 hours of volunteer labor. And I would invite any and all of you, if you have a real love for Mount Sutro, to come up on the first or third Saturday of the month, or every Wednesday, and work as a volunteer, helping develop the trails that everybody says they like, and take a few minutes to go up to the summit, to San Francisco Rotary Meadow, and see what a really good-looking eucalyptus tree looks like when it's given some room to grow. Because we have a gorgeous eucalyptus planting up in Rotary Meadow, and if 10%, 5% of eucalyptus trees on the mountain look like that eucalyptus tree, you wouldn't miss the 3,000 puny things that they're going to try and take down. I have to say, if you look at that, it's a monoforest. It's all plants of one type, pretty much, in the trees. A little open space in the summit, that's Rotary Meadow. And the plants may not be altogether native, but they were called to be plants that grow in similar climes. And a nursery was established, and the university gave us some land to have a nursery for the stewards, and I think that was probably, about 3 or 4 years ago, Craig? And we are propagating plants, the progeny of the plants that the Rotarians planted, and progeny of the plants that are native to the area or the climes. The understories, it sounds really sexy, excuse my language, but if you've been out there trying to clear the trails or clear areas and have fallen through what looks like land and turns out to be a cover of some ivy and poison oak down into sticks and things that will cause fires if there's a fire. And the hysteria that I've heard tonight about these clearings of areas for ingress of firefighters, sure, we could not plan for a disaster, and then we have a disaster, and then everybody says, why didn't the university plan for it? I think it's, I don't want to say disingenuous, I think it's fakery to accuse the university of drumming up some management plan for a possible hazard. This is, I've got a property, and I know that the CAL FIRE sends me a notice that I need to clear 100 feet in every direction around any habitable structure. And I've been on my property, and I've seen trees fall across my road. And they, last spring I went up, and there was a tree I was planning to cut down, and I went up there, and it had been hit by lightning, cut down, and fell down on my house. I pulled the roof, damaged the roof. The fact of the matter is, folks, the university is a very responsible steward of this gem. And if you want a eucalyptus forest, go over to Mount Davidson. There's a eucalyptus forest in walking distance.
They're cutting it.
The city wants to cut
Yeah. They want
The
to cut
fact of the matter is, the fact of the matter is, I challenge any of you to go up to Rotary Meadow and look at that eucalyptus tree and tell me it has any analogous meaning with all of the trees that they're talking about cutting down. Because they're spindly, they don't reach out to the canopy, all they do is make for more spindly trees, and I really think that the university deserves an award for listening to some of these hyperbolic arguments that I've heard tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker is Ariane, then we have Herbert Donmeyer and Morley Singer after that.
We're living during a time of catastrophic climate change. A time when the temperature of our atmosphere and our oceans are dangerously rising. Worldwide, we are facing drought, typhoons, and massive species extinction. These are products of human carelessness, greed-based and short-lived, short-sighted projects, not a result of trees and animals attacking humans. This is a time to question how we have lived, how we've used our planet and each other. We are fooling ourselves if we think we will survive this, if we can continue to lay waste to our planet. We're living on a limb of extinction. UCSF treats the forest as a resource, as a place for an opportunity. They language all the presentations and media in such a way as to demonize the forest. They project fear and anger onto these beautiful trees in a way that dramatically depicts the forest as a quote-unquote threat, as a quote-unquote fire hazard, as dangerous, as incendiary, when many of these trees are older than all of us here. In fact, they are older than every single building on UCSF's campus. So I say this to the administrators of UCSF and to the Board of Regents. You talk about quote-unquote urgent fire measures, yet you created a so-called emergency in August as a means to further your goals. And you killed 1,000 trees. Will you use this tactic again to raise the forest? Your language reveals a troubling trend in public institutions, including institutions of higher learning. institutions that are increasingly privatized and influenced by corporate interests. You call yourself stewards, yet you choreograph a crisis after repeatedly demonizing trees that are silent and have no way to protect themselves. Yes, you practice environmental racism. Chauvinism is not enough to say what you practice. You practice genocide of trees and animals. Your objectives focus on destruction, on crime, and yet you language it as, quote unquote, protecting life and structures, unquote. This is doublespeak. You blame century-old trees that epitomize love and neighborliness, while you practice killing. Yet these trees that hold the power to continue to offer homes to diverse animal species, that clean our air thanklessly, that act as a wind and fire break, that help us sequester carbon dioxide at a time when we've depleted the environment of many of our greatest and most invisible resources, at a time when we need every tree that we can get to save life on this planet and the life of the planet itself. You risk this life, and you risk our lives. This forest does not belong to UCSF, nor does it belong to the Board of Regents. It belongs to the Commons, and this forest is located on public lands. These trees are alive. They have a right to exist. This is a sacred forest. These trees do not belong to UCSF. They're part of a sacred trust for all San Franciscans, all Californians, and beyond. We ask that UCSF desist from its land development and be honest with its neighbors and protect these trees.
Herbert, Dunmeyer, and then Morley Singer and Sue Blackman.
I hope I can be brief in making a couple of points. Chancellor, I pat you on the back for striding through this budget. All right? I have an East Coast accent. As a kid growing up in New Jersey, I could go out my back door right into the woods. I could go hunting in a moment's notice. And I doubt that there's anyone in here who could have been a better tree climber in their youth than I was. So I know trees. I love trees. However, I think there's a balance. And let me say that about 15, 20 years ago, when I first got involved in coming to one of these, I quickly learned that there was a group of people called the Native Plant Society. And the next thing I knew, someone was taking the liberty of cutting, girdling Monterey cypress trees at Laguna Honda Reservoir. Somebody thought he was better than anyone else at making the determination whether or not trees should go. And tonight, since there should be members of the Native Plant Society here, I would like to honor that individual by asking him to stand up and introduce him to me as having better insight than I might have or you might have in the destruction of certain trees. Is there someone here who can address that?
Is he here?
My word, we don't have anyone with courage. Can't stand up. Can't help identify. Chancellor, I hope, as you weigh the information you're gathering, the scientific information and whatever, keep that in mind, that you might have some individuals who think they're better than the rest of us in making that kind of decision. And if you were to look at Laguna Honda Reservoir and look up over the hill on the edge, you'll see a couple evergreen trees that obviously were buried and have died. There's skeletons up there. We want to preserve that hillside for native plants, you see? And the rest of us can go to hell, whether or not we like the trees. Now, the other point I'd like to make in Kent, I had the pleasure, by the way, they cut down a beautiful Monterey cypress right at the intersection of Clarendon Boulevard and Laguna Honda Boulevard about 15 years ago. And I caught the fellow when he was up in the tree cutting. And I asked him why he was doing it. He said because it was diseased. He said it because it was leaning in such a way it could damage the retaining wall there if it fell. And the better one was, he said, it's been reported homeless people are living in this area. What a bunch of BS. Now, it so happened that Harry Cole, chairman of the horticulture department at UC Davis, is somebody I knew. And I talked Harry into coming and looking at the results of this, along with a lifelong friend of mine who was a horticulture professor his whole career at Rutgers, my alma mater. And the two of them looked at it and said, Herb, that was a bunch of BS. That beautiful tree was cut down by one of these idiots who doesn't have the courage to even stand up. All right? And the last point I want to make, Ken, please, when you're cutting these trees, I'd rather you tell me you're going to cut a tree that produces less transformation of carbon dioxide to oxygen than another one. I have yet to hear any of the professionals tell me that you've done a study as to which trees have the best production of oxygen from the atmospheric carbon dioxide there around it. I'd rather you tell me you're going to cut a tree that's 9 inches thick. Why? Because it wasn't going to give us as much oxygen as the other tree next to it. I'd like that to be included in the URL. Thank you.
So, Marlon Singer and Sue Blankman are next speakers, and Bob Siegel after that.
I'd like to thank all the previous speakers for their articulate and passionate and brief speeches, because I want to make a long one.
Where are they?
Coming to these meetings for the last 12 years, I think it entitles me to a little extra time. So if you'll indulge me, please do. Who am I?
Mine's are fun.
I'm a friend, a dear friend of UC. I trained there, took my residency training there. I started the first intensive care unit there, and I was in the faculty for 10 years. So I owe my profession and my career to UC. The institution is highly esteemed, and their work and what you, the taxpayers, pay them to do in medical education, patient care, and research is world-class and outstanding. But this project is a cockamamie, ridiculous cancer on their otherwise good activities. So I repeat that I am a friend of the institution. It's like a parent trying to correct their child from walking near a cliff or swimming in deep water. And what I'm going to say may sound harsh, and it grieves me to have to say it, but I'm going to say it. Do not confuse UC's integrity and good work in the medical arena with this project. The small gesture reveals the man, the small gesture can reveal the institution. For more than a decade, they have used subterfuge, outright lies, misrepresentations, and trickery to campaign to cut down all the trees in the forest. I grieve also with maligning individuals. When Barbara French speaks, was very articulate. Her career, her profession is public relations. Some people define public relations as being able to create a new reality. That's what Barbara does very effectively. I admire her professionalism in that arena. But she knows as much about managing a forest as I know about medieval tapestries, which is nothing. She lives in Marin, walks in the woods over there. Many people have already mentioned the deceptive urgency about cutting down the trees in the forest as an urgent matter. I have the advantage here of commenting on some previous speakers' remarks. The overwhelming majority, I'm in tremendous agreement with, admire their articulate and passionate presentation. But Craig Dawson mentioned the decline in the forest and the adverse health of the forest because there's vines climbing up the trees and there's a canopy in the ground. Isn't that what a forest is? Isn't that what a wild forest looks like? I asked the forester, do you ever walk in the forest? I live in the Sierra for a good part of the year. I walk in the forest, they're wild, they're messy and dirty, and that's what a forest is. We have this superb wild forest in the center of the city. Do you feel nervous when you're walking in the trail through the forest in the Sierra? It's the same as it is in Mount Sutro. Has UCSF ever consulted with the Department of Forestry, which exists in the university structure? There's one in Berkeley. There's experts there who I've spoken to who think this project is a cockamamie project. Why did they not consult with inside the institution? They've hired guns. This gentleman is much more civil in his manner than the previous forester, who was a hired gun and stood to make vast amounts of money cutting down trees for the next decade. The fire threat, many say, is greatly overstated. It was already mentioned that FEMA rejected the UCSF grant. I want to somewhat separate item. These are newspaper clippings over the past several years. Headlines in the San Francisco Chronicle, not by one writer, but by many writers. UC execs demand $1 million. Well, there was a strike shut down the university yesterday because they wouldn't give the service employees a nickel an hour rate. But the executives are taking home millions. UC cannot afford its mission. Now, that's not some radical street guy yelling at the university. This is Udolph, the president of the university, stating to the public and the government that UC can't afford its primary mission of education. Well, money problem. UC set to raise tuition again, another time. And a review in the Chronicle by the legislative analyst, not a radical street person, who says UC is setting too many of their own rules, and they function in the way they do what they want to do, and are not responsive to the public. These are varied articles at varied times by different writers. So that goes on to the economics of this. Paul Roderick mentioned the $1 million. Now, if you were begging the legislature for more money, and you said you couldn't fulfill your mission, and you couldn't accept out-of-state students, and you had to raise tuition, translate that into your home and say you couldn't pay your mortgage. Would that be a time you decide to remodel the kitchen? You couldn't send your kids to school. Would that be time to buy a new Ferrari? The economics, and we repeatedly requested a budget from the university for the economics of this project, and always being rejected, or it's vague, it's not there. They have spent, rough guess, $1 million in the last decade on this project already, and they haven't even started to cut yet. There's a long list of outside consultants we are in the process of requesting they document the amounts of money spent on this list, and we'll take that to the legislature and the Board of Regents. And freedom of information, they're compelled to give us that information. They won't give us the information on internal time, but if you look at the documents that they put out, it's at least double the amount they spent on outside consultants. So, independent of arguments about whether you like big trees or little trees or skinny trees or native plants or non-native, that's secondary. The economics are such it's not a feasible project. Also, I really hate to say this, we've learned over a decade of these meetings, do not trust them. Be highly skeptical about every item presented and everything they say. They say they'll cut down, the previous gentleman stated quite nicely, they say they'll cut down 6-inch trees and they cut down 9-inch trees. You cannot predict what they will do next. The propaganda that's issued, again, a small act. I think you all got the notice of this meeting. And it's in that notice from Dave and Lou, they advertised there was a little brush fire near the Laguna Honda home. And they were happy that the fire department put that out. What's that got to do with what we're here talking about tonight? It's sort of like trying to scare you more about the fire risk. And actually cutting down the trees would create more dry brush and increase the fire risk. So the whole project is so strange and cockamamie. I wish somebody could explain to me what is the moving force and the relentless pursuit of this cockamamie project that they're spending so much money on, so much time, and so much energy. And I'm angry from having come into these meetings for a decade and hearing more propaganda and so on. Now, I respect the sincerity of the consultant here and his views, but when you hire a consultant, you kind of tell them what you'd like the consultant to say. And he's done it in a responsible manner. But it's a step in the right direction. But my suggestion is you start all over again, and with the aim of preserving the forest as it is, removing what mechanical hazards there are. Oh, I forgot one thing about the little details that are revealing. The fire, I have a home in the Sierra surrounded by trees, and it's illegal. You have to clear an area 30 to 100 feet around the house as defensible space. That same law applies here. Why did you choose 100 feet instead of 30 feet? We're surrounded by firefighting equipment. It's much safer than it is when you're surrounded by national forest area. Again, these small gestures are what undermine the trust and the sincerity and the rationale of what you're doing. Another little, I'm sorry, Barbara, but you can debate this if you like. But up until 5-6 years ago, Barbara French, who was leading this project, never walked through the forest. I took her for a walk through the forest. We had a nice walk. She had never been in there. There's fire hydrants in the forest beside the roads. Barbara French did not know who served those fire hydrants and who was responsible for them. I walked down to the local firehouse, talked to the great San Francisco Fire Department, and they were responsible for them. But UC had no knowledge of what fire protection was around. I could go on and on, but they're all little details revealing of the general confidence, but incredible determination that you see to cut down trees in the forest. I've taken probably enough time. On a positive note, I would like to say that the forest is a wild and beautiful and unique place in the middle of a civilized area of 7-8 million people. There's no place like it. It's very special. And I never feel more safe when I'm running and walking through the forest with my dog than I do on the trails, which I appreciate the construction of the trails. There's many other places I feel less safe. I feel less safe walking through the forest in the Sierra. I feel less safe walking down Mission Street at 3 a.m. I'm very happy and comfortable and perfectly relaxed in the forest. Under a mild little anecdote, I walk through the forest. I run through 2 or 3 times a week. I've gotten the habit of stopping every other person I encounter on the trail. And I said, do you know that UC wants to cut down thousands of trees in this forest? And the universal response is, why? Why would anybody want to do that? Who's doing that? 100% of the time. I thank you for listening. Thank you for having me.
We're still another set of speakers here. I hope we can have you all stay and listen to the remarks. So Sue Blankman is next, Bob Siegel, and then Naomi Perez, and Randy Swindell after that.
Thank you. I just want to first appreciate and acknowledge all the wonderful citizens who have spoken tonight, especially those of you who have stayed this long. Everybody, so many of the people here have pretty much already spoken for me, so hopefully I'll reiterate what needs to be reiterated and hopefully add something new. First of all, I also want to acknowledge UCSF in having revised the original plan, which I thought was really horrendous and completely unnecessary in terms of the tens of thousands of trees that were initially going to be cut under this plan and herbicide use. So as Rupe also acknowledged, I think it is a great improvement. However, I agree with many of the previous speakers that it is still completely unnecessary. As many of you know, and maybe some of you didn't know until tonight, Mount Sutro is a cloud forest, which means that it does absorb all this moisture and hold for days and days, even weeks on end when it's not wet. A great amount of moisture year-round, both in the overstory and the understory, regardless of what that understory is, whether it's blackberry, whether there's vines up the trees that are strangling the trees or whatever, is really insignificant. What's significant is that there is no fire hazard in the Mount Sutro cloud forest. If thousands or even hundreds of trees in the wrong places were cut down, it would then become a fire hazard, and in fact, more than that, would become a landslide risk. Now, as most people know, probably everybody in this room knows, anytime you cut down significant amounts of trees on a hillside, especially in California, where it typically does get dry, you have a landslide risk. You risk, the root systems that are holding that mountain in place, disintegrating over a number of 6 to 8 years, even after those trees are cut. Those roots continue to disintegrate and cause a landslide risk. And that happens all over the world, not just here, not just in California. In fact, there was another area of forest knolls, I can't remember where it was exactly, but another area of forest knolls where a section had been cut down and in fact did cause dangerous landslides. And that hillside had to be covered for a number of years by huge tarps while they tried to somehow mitigate that risk. I mean, it was just a barren hillside. Obviously, not as many trees, or more trees were cut there than is projected for this plan, but it is definitely a risk, and it hasn't really been mentioned tonight, so I wanted to mention that. I don't really understand why you would want to pose that sort of risk for the residents, and I should add, I have been a resident on Crestmont Drive, right by the Oakhurst Stairs for a number of years, and I think it's perfectly fine the way it is. I enjoy the habitat. It is a lovely and very important ecosystem. There are a number of birds. Every time I see a red-tailed hawk, I'm just thrilled to pieces, or an owl, or any number of birds that I hear and I see every day. It's amazing. Aside from that, I have to say that even after tonight, with the responses that I've heard from Mr. Julian and from Ms. French, etc., I am even more skeptical and wary of UCSF's plan than I was prior. And I've done my homework for a while now, as have many, if not most of you. I'm particularly concerned when I read about the fact that UCSF had actually drafted a letter about this alleged extra hazardous fire risk during, I guess it was August, September. I was actually out of town during that time, so I didn't get to visit the forest during that time, but all my friends were complaining about the wet, cold weather during that period. And when I did come back in mid-September, it was finally lovely, but it had apparently up till then not been so. But they had drafted this letter in the name of the San Francisco Fire Department, without the San Francisco Fire Department's say for their signature, did not consult with them at all, and then only asked the fire department to make a very first site visit, I understand, once the cutting of over 1,000 trees had already begun. Now, if I'm wrong, please let me know, but this is what I read that was documented, and if there's any discrepancy there, I hope you'll respond to that. But I just feel like there have been a number of issues that other people have already brought up that sort of point to UCSF and the board obfuscating the truth, hiding the truth, and being, as another man accused others in this room of being disingenuous and lacking any real transparency. And that really sort of destroys any sort of good faith that our community needs and deserves in order to be able to make informed decisions and opinions about this. So I feel like UCSF really needs to speak to that, why they have not been completely upfront and honest about the letter to SF Fire Department, their involvement, these trees being cut down before an EIR had even been finalized. I don't understand why that is even going on. Maybe there's a loophole that I'm not aware of that allows you to do that, but if so, I think it's wrong regardless. And then what else? I wanted to mention, so I did have a question, and this was brought up before, although nobody actually answered it directly, so I'm going to ask you to answer it directly. Given the fact that, and it is a fact, that this cloud forest keeps the area very, very wet and does not pose a fire hazard. These trees are not even mature yet. They're at about a fourth or a fifth of their maturity state, which would be 400 to 500 years if they're in a wet environment like this. So it's not even mature yet. But given that this is a fact, in my opinion, that doesn't make sense, but it is a fact. It's not just my opinion, it's a fact, as you all can attest. What is UCSF's long-term plan for this area? Is it to build? Is it something beyond just creating a safer environment for residents and for hopefully wildlife, for students, for whatever? I'd really like to know, because I can't help, with UC and the Regent's past history of being sort of, I hate to say, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but sort of money-grubbing landowners and developers. I really have to wonder if that's not the real motive, and I hope that it's not. So if you'll answer that question, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So what's the long-term plan?
The long-term plan is to keep a forest a forest. There's no development plans. There's no intention and no idea, no spark of interest in that. The other thing to address is you asked a question around the letter. The fire department, Chief Hayes White and her fire marshal and a couple of there's a battalion chief and several firefighters with her toured the site before any work was done, and they toured the site after the work was done to confirm that we did what we said we were going to do.
Okay, thank you very much. Bob Siegel, Naomi Perret, and Randy Swindell, our next speakers. Go ahead. Again, if you could get closer to the mic there.
Yeah, I thought this was just going to be for 2 minutes, and I prepared a little talk here. I'll make it even shorter. The best part of this meeting is that it was so well attended. Well, not at this hour, but it was well attended. Yeah. And that those in attendance are so passionate about this natural area that they love. And I imagine it's also true of the people that some people have been attacking all night. I think they too are very happy that they are in charge of this space preserve and have the opportunity to make sure that it continues for many generations. I do think that another positive thing was that the UC has mentioned or has addressed a lot of the issues that people have mentioned, such as the herbicide, which was the major issue, I think, the last meeting, one of the major issues. And they have addressed that, so I think they should be applauded for that. I think they should also be applauded for bringing a highly acclaimed forester who has come and looked at it again, and I think that's fine. I do remember, too, at the last meeting, everyone said there's never been a fire there. And then one woman got up and said, I'm sorry, I was on my I saw a flyer on the edge of mine. I think those of you, maybe I'll remind you, there was one there that said, yes, I've seen a fire. So we don't know when fires are going to start, and they don't happen often. They happen. And I think, like a predecessor, someone spoke earlier, said, probably the same people over here hammering UC, you'll be back here in 20, 30 years if it happens that, your house goes down in flames because, nothing happened. So I think we have to be respectful of that they're trying to do something to protect this area for us all. And I do think that forests like this do need management. They are in the middle of a great urban area. And I do think if we want to protect it for future generations, which all love it, then we have to do something very thought out and just not let it go to pot. Because it's a beautiful place and we want it to be continued. It can be rough and it can be not quite as rough, but it can still be a beautiful forest. So I do think that UC has answered some of the concerns that you all have and that I've had. And I think that we should go forth and love our forest, like we all do.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see, Naomi, correct? Maybe she's left. Randy Swindell and Melissa LaRue. Randy? Melissa? Okay, you're next. And after that, we have Karen Ulring and Thomas Lee.
Hi there. I really appreciate how some people were better able to articulate, and I feel like I've been more positively influenced by listening. I would like to say first, there is no them, it is only us. And what's really cool about what's happening is we're having a really important discussion that will be our legacy. And we talk a lot about life, and we talk a lot about the future generations. I wish to leave my future generations with plenty of water and plenty of air to breathe and plenty water, life, air, trees and birds, man! Trees and birds. Okay, so here's something. I am a landscaper. So ivy, woo, is for real. Ivy is for real. However, this is what is really exciting. It's life. And so if we make some poor decisions, nature can survive. So that feels good to me. But back on there is no us. So 300 trees, 2,000 trees. So I think we have this mentality that is still from when we arrived here. When there were so many trees that we couldn't even see. There's so many trees, you can't see the forest for the trees, can't see the trees from the forest. Things are different. We've used our resources. We've utilized our resources. And we need to shift our mentality. We cannot move forward with the life-necessary elements of water, food, which is basically the soil is transforming, these amazing things to make our food, and air. So these are like our basic necessities. And when we say, it's only 2,000 trees, it's only 1,000 trees, and think about the safety, think about these people, how many homes would be potentially saved? And can we quantify how many birds live in one tree? And so we've already cut 1,000, and it's like this mentality of, it's only 1,000 trees. Well, how much wildlife is that? And what do birds do? You're a research institution that is based on progressive values and the well-being and perpetuation of life. How many birds live in trees? And I think that birds are completely necessary in the ecological balance and harmony. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure trees are too. Trees put carbon back in the ground. They make sure that water is anchored and stays there. Water is necessary for all life. Air, clean air. So what's funny is that human beings were so stuck on this mentality to make sure that we get our human needs met. Don't worry, there's fire, there's danger. Oh no, fire, danger. Well, that's a possibility. but I need to eat every day. I eat about 3 times a day. I need to breathe air. I need to breathe air often. I need to drink water or I'll die. So I just want to honor that I, as a human being, can't create oxygen. I also cannot sequester carbon. I make it. So there is no them, it's only us.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Karen Oring and Thomas Lee are the next speakers. We have Karen. Thomas. And after that, we have Rosemary Ullman.
It looks like the crowd has thinned even more than the thinning proposed in the original proposal, so I'll be brief. My concerns about the project have been mostly addressed by previous speakers, but just 2 things I wanted to reemphasize. One is that the use of the urgent fire measures to do a short-term clearing, even though it was a small scale, that's very disturbing to me. So that's very disturbing to me. I just wanted to emphasize that. Whenever fear is used to shorten or subvert or work around a participatory democratic process, whether it's for a small local issue or for a larger national issue, is of great concern. Another thing that it does is it assures, unfortunately it assures a lot of scrutiny. I'll certainly put a lot of scrutiny on anything UCSF does, and it really decreases the trust. And I think that even does a disservice to the people who believe in this project and who have worked on it. I think it does a disservice to those people as well. The other thing is, again, I wanted to speak to the nature of the forest. I'm not sure these measures really have taken into account the wetness of the forest. It's a very simple thing. I can believe that you have to cut trees away from a road. It makes it easier for the fire trucks to get there. But are you, in fact, increasing the risk of fire for that reason? And I haven't seen an analysis of that. And the sad thing is that if some years in the future, if, God forbid, a fire does happen, I can see this project going forward, clear the room with fire trucks, and can we really say, was this project helpful in saving the forest, or did it actually cause the fire? And I don't see any evidence one way or the other that you can say that no, this does not increase fire risk.
Let's see, Rosemary Ullman and Matt Winooski and Bob or Ben Peace.
First, I want to be sure that we originally mentioned 30 feet distance between trees was of the old plan, but that's not valid anymore.
Correct.
So today it's not the 32 feet anymore.
Correct.
Do you have, at this point, do you have a distance that you have set your mind on between trees?
That's no longer.
So it's just the size of the trunk, supposedly?
Well, let's ask Kent the basis for that.
Well, the original proposal, I think, called for two different spacings. One was 30 feet between trees, and another one was 60 feet between
Well, that was
trees.
even worse, yes.
And so what we will do if we move forward is to space the trees based on the existing density. So the area in the south, let's take that one for example, will be moving from a density of say 10 feet between trees to, this is an average on an acre basis, to maybe 12 feet or 14 feet. So it's not substantially different. So it's nowhere near 30 feet.
Okay. And the other question was, you mentioned the 24, the 21 acres in the north, which will be treated differently. Can you elaborate on that?
Okay, Kent.
So the area in the north, the trees are very large. The spacing between them is probably 30 to 50 feet.
Give me an idea of the north. Is that by Stanton Street?
That's the road that comes up right behind the hospital.
That's Edgewood?
Medical Center Way.
Well, the north is sort of Stanton.
Okay, so if we turn and look at the map.
Edgewood and Stanton, that's the north.
That's correct. Wonderful. All right, so this is the hospital?
Right.
This is the north area that I was referring to. So this is Parnassus, right?
Yes.
Medical Center Way. So that's where it is, right there next to the hospital.
Okay, so how about the east, that eastern area?
Okay, so this area here has already been managed pretty aggressively. It's pretty open in the understory.
The lady's talking about where you're standing, that's actually not UCSF property.
Oh, it
The
is?
area you're standing is the interior green belt.
Right here?
It's owned by the city and county of San Francisco.
But they're still, they are cutting it.
I don't know.
I was walking there, and they were supposedly doing the fire, at the point, it was 30 feet fire free when I was there. They were actually cutting it.
If it's in the interior green belt, the folks who manage that are the city's Parks and Rec department.
Nice.
Park and Rec.
Okay.
Okay, so go ahead.
I just want to, everything has been, most of the stuff has already been mentioned, and I just want to put my 5 cents worth in. If you cut the undergrowth, it will make the forest less of a cloud forest, it will attract less moisture, it will be more of a fire hazard. And the undergrowth is not just ivy and blackberry. Walking through there, I've picked plums, there are flowers, there are all sorts of things which you may not notice if you don't really look at it. And there are lots of, besides birds, there are lots of animals. There are opossums, there are cocoons, there are woodlice, squirrels, there are lots of other animals. And if you cut the undergrowth, all that will be gone. And the very worst is it will make it more of a fire hazard. I spoke.
So a couple more speakers here. Matt Praneski, Ben Pease.
Hi, my name is Matt Wisniewski. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for Sutro Stewards. I don't see Harold here, but I want to thank him for plugging the fact that we have volunteer programs every first and third Saturday. If you guys really care about Mount Sutro open space, I highly encourage you to show up and help us keep it accessible for all San Franciscans. It's an awesome thing. One analogy that I think has really been useful for me in terms of thinking about how to create a really healthy, really resilient forest has been in terms of like pruning a tree to bear fruit. I have a background in environmental science, and when I was learning how to prune, I thought that there was no way that cutting smaller branches to kind of prevent this overlap would actually create like a more productive tree. You can actually get way, way more fruit out of the tree if it's properly pruned. I think that analogy is useful when I think about the forest and Mount Sutro. I think that there are ways to effectively manage it in a way that would make it more resilient and healthier overall. That's it.
Thank you very much, Matt. Matt is the next speaker.
Ben Pease, one of the co-founders of Sutro Stewards. I like the focus of the proposed project, whatever you call this, new direction perhaps to look at the forest, actively managing it. Still getting used to the idea as a cartographer. I'm a little bit wary of big red blotches on maps, but I have to say the area on the south side of the south side could use a little work. We can go out and we work on the trails, we look at the forest looks at us, and the south could use some work. Never looked over the west side of things, but except with a little bit of trepidation, but it's quite a piece of splintered little trees, and I like the approach of making things work right, I guess, more than a prescriptive 30 feet, 50 feet, whatever. It seems like you've got an approach that's better storytelling, but also better action in terms of finding the right balance of things. Going back to the theme of an earlier speaker raised about there is no them, there is only us. Sutro Stewards has carefully avoided sometimes talking about the forest as a cloud forest, because other people talk about the forest as a cloud forest. Some other people have been disparaging native plants, and just as a matter of habit, not really very open-minded towards the plants that have been here. You may not find native plants so much on Mount Sutro, but we have about 2, 3, 4 dozen understory species that are native. That survive under the eucalyptus. You have to look no further than Twin Peaks, the east side of Mount Davidson. We're in headlands, same damn soil, and you see what looks like the original habitat. I've tried to set up some food walks in the forest. The questions come up, what do you restore to? If you're going to restore native plants or plant native plants, what do you restore to? And his answer was, you don't restore, you're never going to turn back the clock. The trees are real. In fact, the Native Plant Society folks have said the plants, they don't have a position on the eucalyptus. As long as they're not spreading into habitat, then they're there. They're good. They wouldn't go plant more of them, but no one's talking about erasing the forest. That being said, you look at someplace like the Northern Heavens, you've got a cloud forest. It's 3 feet tall. It's coyote brush. Underneath coyote brush grows blackberry vines. Underneath blackberry vines grows ferns. So if you look at the forest today, and you're restoring to now, eucalyptus is just a big old overgrown coyote bush, perhaps. And within that, we can figure out what sort of understory plants belong under there. I am not a great fan of ivy. I grew up trimming it as a small boy and a large boy, and just thought that was my task, was trimming the ivy off for your ivy, and every year it grew back better and better. I hate the stuff. But on the whole, there's definitely room for some sort of understory there that can maintain the moisture that everybody has been talking about the forest needed, not just the overstory, but the understory. Within the forest, the spindly trees, the trees that you leave, are going to have a better crown. That's also going to help maintain the moisture. Some sort of working together that maintains a fairly healthy understory. Not too big ladder-causing, flame-causing bushes that climb up or ivy vines up the trees. The work we've done on certain demonstration areas along the historic trail and the East Ridge Trail have kept in that moisture and helped rebuild the soil with plants that are not really so fire prone as what was there before. The thatch underneath the 6-foot blackberry that was causing fire danger back at that time. And nothing growing underneath that 6-foot tall blackberry, nothing in the ground whatsoever when you clear it off. So, I guess my one concern would be as volunteer plants things out in the forest, that mowing would not be the only solution, or that there be enough of a dialogue that things that shouldn't be mown are not mown, and that with respect to areas that even within the colored areas on the map, there's native plants like East Ridge with bearberry and goodberry and so forth that we're not auto-identify together and make sure they're well kept.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ben. And why don't we... okay, Dennis?
I'll speak through here. I am listening very carefully to all the people who say that this is a cloud forest. It's always wet, and there's no fire danger. And I personally have walked up there a number of times and hear snap, crackle, and pop as I walk along. Because things are so dry that if I threw a match down there, they'd go up like that. So I don't understand. This is an actual observations that I've made a number of times So I don't, and it's particularly true as you watch the clouds come in on the west. By the time you get to the east side, there's very little moisture coming over. And so if you go to the east side of the forest, you'll find a lot of dryness, particularly at certain times of the year. So it's just, it's partially true, but it's also partially false. So there are times when there is a fire danger up there. That's very clear. Secondly, when you remove these smaller, unhealthy trees, the remaining trees, the larger trees, grow a much healthier canopy. They're going to capture more moisture because the moisture comes in from the canopy. It doesn't come in from down below. These small areas are not capturing the moisture. The moisture is coming over the tops of the canopy. When you thin these trees and you allow greater space and greater nutrition, greater amount of water to go to the remaining trees, those remaining trees are going to capture a great deal of carbon. So in the beginning, there'll be a loss of some carbon. There'll be an addition of some carbon to the atmosphere. But in the long run, there'll be less. They'll actually the forest will be able to capture more carbon because those big healthy trees are going to absorb the carbon in order to continue to grow, which they will do. So there's some truth and there's some falsehood, or at least error, in all of these issues. There are always, every year that I've been up there have been times when I say snap, crackle, and pop. It is so dry that, and it's true, there's many times when it's not dry, when it's very moist. There's no question, I agree. There are many, many times when it is, but there are also many, many times when it's not true. And so when you say there's no fire danger, first of all, go back. There have been major fires. Now, there haven't been for a large number of years, but it's not true that this forest is a cloud forest that's not subject to fires. There have been 2 very major fires on Mount Sutro in the past. It is a long time ago, but it is the truth. And so please don't believe in your heart that there's no fire danger up here. Because most of the time there isn't, but there clearly are times when it is. And don't believe that because we thin trees that we're going to be increasing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. Over the long run, we'll be decreasing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere because the healthier trees are going to grow in a much greater and significant way. If you go, there's so many dead trees falling in that forest all the time. Go up there. There's more and more trees. I started on this project 15 years ago as a member of the community advisory group, and I've gone to places in the forest where it was much healthier 15 years ago. You go up there now, it's in just that short period of time. There's a lot more diseased trees, and there's a lot more fallen trees. It's just happening. It's getting worse, and we need to do something about it. To say do nothing and just leave it alone is dangerous, and it's short-sighted. And I hope that you all don't have to come back here sometime and say, "You see, why didn't you do something?"
Very good. Thank you, Dennis. So why don't we give all the speakers here tonight a round of applause? They did a great job. All of them very articulate and obviously very passionate. We do want to collect any written comments you're willing to turn in, comment cards and notes. And I just want to again remind you of the EIR process. Upcoming dates are up here on the screen. And we will stay around if you'd like to meet with any of the resource people, Kent or Diane or Merrick here from facilities planning on the campus. We'll talk about any of these issues. So thank you very much for coming and staying till the end. We do appreciate the feedback and the comments. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Can I make one last very brief comment? I'd like to have at the record
Okay, we'll write it up there. Okay, thank you very much. Have a great evening. And we're still here to take any comments or questions. questions you might have, just come on up to the front or meet up with the